When Aaliyah Johnson approached the boarding gate for American Airlines Flight 1857 from Chicago to San Francisco, she already felt the weight of eyes tracking her movement. It wasn't paranoia. It was the hyper-awareness that came from years of experiencing what white America conveniently labeled isolated incidents. At 32, Aaliyah had mastered the carefully calculated performance required of black professionals in predominantly white spaces. Designer suit, but not too flashy. Natural hair styled conservatively, voice modulated to sound articulate without being aggressive. Harvard Business School tote that functioned as both status signal and shield. None of it mattered to Karen White, the gate agent whose plastic smile vanished the moment Aaliyah presented her first-class boarding pass. "This can't be right," Karen muttered, examining the digital ticket on Aaliyah's phone with exaggerated scrutiny. Her French manicured nails tapped aggressively against the screen, as though hoping to find a forgery beneath the pixels. "Is there a problem?" Aaliyah asked, maintaining the professional calm she'd perfected during a decade at Morton Consulting, where she'd recently made partner, the first black woman to do so in the firm's history. "This seat shows as occupied in our system," Karen replied, not bothering to make eye contact. "There must be a glitch in the app." Aaliyah's colleague Marcus Chen, standing just behind her in the priority boarding line, raised an eyebrow. His first-class ticket, purchased through the same corporate portal on the same reservation, had been scanned without comment just moments earlier. "That's strange," Aaliyah said, maintaining her composure. "Could you check again? The confirmation came through fine this morning." Karen's lips tightened into what Aaliyah privately called the doubting white woman purse. That particular expression of skepticism reserved for situations where black competence was automatically suspect. "I can see you've checked in, but there's clearly an issue with your seat assignment," Karen announced, with the satisfied tone of someone who'd found the flaw they were looking for. "We'll have to move you to economy. There's nothing else available in first." Marcus stepped forward. "Excuse me, we're traveling together on a business trip. Our tickets were booked simultaneously through our corporate account. If there's an issue with the reservation, it would affect both of us." Karen's eyes flickered to Marcus, taking in his expensive suit, his Asian features, his male presence, and her demeanor shifted subtly. "Let me check one more thing." Her fingers clacked loudly against the keyboard, her expression hardening. "The system is showing your colleague as waitlisted for an upgrade that didn't clear. We're oversold in first today." It was a lie. Aaliyah knew it was a lie. She had received her first-class confirmation that morning, had selected her meal preference, had the email verification stored in her phone. But she also recognized the calculation required in this moment. Make a scene and become the angry black woman stereotype, potentially missing her flight and the crucial client meeting tomorrow, or accept the injustice and document it later. "I see," Aaliyah said neutrally. "And what compensation is offered when a confirmed first-class passenger is downgraded?" Karen's smile returned, brittle as plastic. "Customer service can address that after your flight. I need to continue boarding now. Here's your new boarding pass for 23B. No apology. No acknowledgement of the inconvenience. No offer of the standard voucher that airline policy dictated for involuntary downgrades." "This isn't right," Marcus muttered as Aaliyah stepped aside to let other passengers board. "You want me to give up my seat too?" "Absolutely not," Aaliyah replied firmly. "One of us needs to make that meeting. But I would appreciate if you could take detailed notes about what happens in first class. I'll do the same in economy." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. They both knew what was happening. They'd both seen it before. The only difference was that this time, they were going to document everything. As Aaliyah boarded the aircraft, the lead flight attendant, Carla, according to her name tag, glanced at her economy boarding pass with barely disguised satisfaction. 23B is toward the back, left-hand side," she said, gesturing dismissively down the aisle, though she'd provided detailed seat guidance to the white businessman who'd boarded just ahead of Aaliyah. Making her way through first class, Aaliyah noted that seat 2C, her originally assigned seat, was indeed empty, contrary to Karen's claim about the cabin being full. By the time she reached economy, the overhead bins were largely filled, forcing her to check the designer briefcase that contained her presentation materials for tomorrow's meeting. Squeezed into the middle seat between a teenager engrossed in his Switch and an older man already encroaching on her armrest, Aaliyah pulled out her phone and began making notes in a document titled AA1857 Incident Log, recording times, names, and verbatim quotes while they were still fresh. Halfway through the 4-hour flight, Aaliyah observed a black woman across the aisle, perhaps in her mid-50s, conservatively dressed in a cardigan and slacks, press the call button. When Carla passed through the cabin 2 minutes later, she pointedly ignored the illuminated button. The woman pressed it again. 3 minutes later, a different flight attendant, a younger woman whose name tag read Veronica, responded. "May I have a blanket, please?" the woman asked. "It's quite cold in this section." "We've distributed all the complimentary blankets," Veronica replied apologetically. "I'll check if there are any left in the back." Before Veronica could return, Carla reappeared, cheerfully offering a blanket to the white woman in the row ahead, who hadn't requested one, with a solicitous, "You looked a bit chilly, hun. Here you go." Aaliyah added this to her growing documentation, noting timestamps and exact locations. What might have once seemed like coincidence or poor service was forming a pattern too consistent to ignore. An hour later, a commotion erupted several rows ahead. A South Asian man was frantically trying to get the attention of the cabin crew, his voice rising with urgency. "My wife needs help. She's having an allergic reaction." The woman beside him was clearly in distress, her face flushed and swelling visibly as she struggled to breathe. Passengers turned in their seats, murmuring with concern. The man pressed the call button repeatedly. Carla's voice came over the intercom. "Please refrain from pressing the call button unless it's an emergency." "This is an emergency," the man shouted back. "She needs her EpiPen from our carry-on." When no immediate response came, a white male passenger from across the aisle stood up and began shouting toward the galley. "Hey, there's a medical emergency back here. Someone needs to respond now." What fascinated him more, however, was the behavior of her fellow passengers. The executives across the aisle had witnessed the entire exchange, but had retreated into the safety of their Wall Street Journal and Financial Times, respectively. The tech entrepreneur had buried himself in his laptop, headphones firmly in place. The socialite had simply pretended not to notice, fixating instead on her second mimosa. It was a microcosm of how bias functioned in American society, not through the dramatic confrontations depicted in viral videos, but through small daily indignities witnessed by many but challenged by few. The courteous silence of good people who recognized injustice but prioritized personal comfort over intervention. Suddenly, the crew's reaction shifted from indifference to urgency. Veronica rushed down the aisle, followed by another flight attendant and the purser. The woman's EpiPen was retrieved from the overhead bin, medical assistance was provided, and oxygen was administered. But only after the white passenger's intervention had made the emergency impossible to ignore. Aaliyah documented everything, her hands steady, but her heart racing with a familiar combination of anger and resignation. This wasn't just poor customer service. This wasn't just one bad apple having a difficult day. This was systemic, patterned behavior that placed certain passengers' needs, comfort, and potentially their lives below others, based on nothing but the color of their skin. During a quiet moment when the cabin crew was occupied with meal service, Veronica, the younger flight attendant who had attempted to help with the blanket situation, paused beside Aaliyah's row. Leaning down under the pretense of checking if Aaliyah wanted coffee or tea, she whispered, "I saw what happened at boarding. Karen White specifically targeted you. She told Carla over the radio to keep an eye on the black woman who thinks she belongs in first. I've reported it internally twice before, but nothing happens." Before Aaliyah could respond, Veronica straightened and continued down the aisle with her service cart. But she had provided the final piece of evidence, confirmation from inside the system that what Aliyah had experienced wasn't imagined, wasn't isolated, and wasn't accidental. When the flight landed in San Francisco, Aliyah waited at the gate for Marcus to deplane from first class. His expression was grim as he approached. "Your seat stayed empty the entire flight," he confirmed. "And I overheard Carla telling another flight attendant that Karen handled it perfectly. They were laughing about how you didn't even put up a fight." Aliyah nodded, unsurprised, but still stung by the casual cruelty. "I've been documenting everything," she said, showing him her detailed notes. "And one of the other flight attendants confirmed that I was deliberately targeted." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked, his expression serious. As a Korean American, he was no stranger to discrimination, though it typically manifested differently than what Aliyah experienced. "What we discussed back in Chicago," she replied firmly. "We're going to make this matter." 3 weeks later, the Department of Transportation announced a formal investigation into American Airlines following a detailed complaint filed by Aliyah Johnson and supported by witness statements from multiple passengers, including Marcus Chen and the family involved in the medical emergency. The complaint, meticulously documented with times, names, and verbatim quotes, alleged a pattern of discriminatory treatment that violated federal laws prohibiting air carriers from subjecting passengers to unjust discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry. When confronted with Aliyah's evidence, including Veronica's testimony about the radio communication, Karen White initially claimed she couldn't recall the incident. When pressed further, she changed her story, suggesting that the system had genuinely shown an issue with Aliyah's seat assignment. When American Airlines' IT department confirmed that no such glitch existed, and that Aliyah's first-class reservation had been properly recorded at every step, Karen's defense crumbled. "Have you ever encountered this problem? And please comment to us how you overcame it." Within days, travel websites and social media were filled with similar accounts from Black and brown passengers who had experienced comparable treatment, not just on American Airlines, but across the industry. What had begun as one woman's careful documentation had sparked a broader reckoning about racial bias in air travel. 2 months after Aliyah's flight, American Airlines issued a public statement announcing the results of their internal investigation. Following a thorough review of the incident on Flight 1857, we have terminated the employment of the gate agent involved and issued a formal warning to one flight attendant. Additionally, we have promoted Veronica Martinez to a new role within our diversity and inclusion training team, where she will help develop improved protocols for equitable customer service. The statement continued with corporate speak about recommitting to our values and ensuring all passengers feel welcome. But Aliyah wasn't concerned with the PR language. She cared about the concrete actions and the message they sent. That documentation matters. That speaking up matters. That refusing to accept isolated incidents as inevitable can sometimes lead to actual consequences. When Morton Consulting's chief diversity officer called to commend Aliyah for pursuing the complaint despite potential career risks, Aliyah was direct in her response. "I didn't do this for corporate applause or diversity gold stars. I did it because most people don't have the resources, documentation skills, or professional backup to fight these battles. And until those of us who do are willing to use our privilege to challenge the system, nothing changes." The following week, when Aliyah boarded another American Airlines flight, this time from San Francisco back to Chicago, she noticed something subtle, but significant. The gate agent scanned her first-class boarding pass without a second glance. The flight attendant greeted her with the same professional courtesy extended to every passenger. Her pre-flight beverage arrived promptly. Her meal preference was remembered. It wasn't special treatment. It was simply equal treatment. The bare minimum that should have been unremarkable, but had required a federal investigation to achieve. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Aliyah gazed out the window at the vast expanse of clouds below. understanding that what she had won wasn't just a personal victory or even justice for a single incident. It was a small but crucial reminder that systems only change when people refuse to accept their brokenness as inevitable. When they document the patterns, speak the uncomfortable truths, and demand accountability. The plane climbed higher, leaving the clouds below, and Aliyah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Sometimes, finding higher ground meant a literal first-class seat. But more importantly, it meant creating a world where being treated with basic dignity wasn't determined by the color of your skin. A world still under construction, but worth fighting for, one documented incident at a time.